One Sunday, I overheard some choristers talking after church. Who's picking these hymns anyway? In an effort to learn which hymns my choristers liked to sing, I began to create a list by scouring old bulletins for hymn titles. Of the hymns most familiar to my church choristers, some of the hymns I know are ardently preferred, while others are vehemently disliked. So my question became, are the preferred hymns more familiar to my choristers, or do the preferred hymns share a greater number of musical features than the hymns that are disliked? And how many of their preferred hymns have musical features in common? Does the key or tonality matter? Maybe the rhythm of the hymn makes a difference, the rhyme scheme, the time signature, and surely the level of difficulty singing could matter. Are the vocal ranges extreme or moderate? Is the part writing full of disjunct melodies and intervallic leaps, or do the melodies move in easier conjunct or stepwise motion? Enter literature review. One of my sopranos told me, I really like the minor hymns because they just sound cool and brooding. Kate Henver in 1935 established that people tend to imbue major and minor modes with effective qualities of happy and sad, respectively, and musical features can exhibit effective emotions in listeners. Hughes and Lois examined musical features of tonality and meter of hymns. Their study found that triple rhythm hymns and minor modes received higher ratings for having a spiritual impact on the worshipers. Comments made by participants in the Hughes-Lois study stressed to the authors that future studies might want to consider variables such as hymn tempo, length, dynamics, and the influence of collective singing. I have chosen to evaluate the length of the hymns because that can affect the singer's enjoyment of the hymn. Ask any singer and they will tell you the songs they enjoy singing most are those that fit nicely within their vocal range. Morse, Daum, and Brotens found preferred music repertoire for the elderly, including vocal ranges, tempos, and accompaniments for singing. Vocal ranges of elderly men ages 60 to 90 were discovered to average between C-sharp 2 to D4, and women ages 60 to 99 averaging ranges from F3 to C5. Because most of my choir members belong to this age range, this study informs my consideration of comfortable vocal range as a potential factor in responses to my survey for level of hymn preference. It has been my experience that intervals within a hymn tune can cause difficulty for singing. Despite the fact that most hymns contain intervallic leaps of fourths and fifths, sometimes these leaps can frustrate the average choral singer, and if used in excess, can create a difficult-to-sing disjunct melody. Turnsing et al. Evaluated a number of hymns for intervallic leaps, specifically intervals of a sixth and greater. For this reason, I surveyed the hymns in my study for their use of large intervals. Also influential to preference is that various intervals have different kind of emotive effects. Many fourths make a tune sound militant and energetic, whilst many sixths or sevenths give a tune a rousing, even sentimental feel. Renfro and Gosling posited a theory of music preferences that saw answers by personality types. Later, Latham, Peterson, and Havlicek examined preferences of older persons by educational levels and musical experience. Both of these studies informed my participant questionnaire. Not much research has been done in a religious setting to provide empirical evidence for music as a, quote, trigger for powerful emotional or numinous experiences, unquote. Hughes and Lois, their research asked the participants if the music was not just enjoyable, but if it gave them goosebumps, or if they felt, quote, the music brought them closer to God, unquote. Although my intent is not to study specific physiological aspects of music and emotion, I did suspect it wise to query my choristers about the value they give to corporate or congregational hymn singing for providing them with increased spirituality. This could influence their preference for the hymns. My choristers largely have been involved in church music most of their lives. It is very likely that some hymns may have more meaning, or they may have associations of life events with the music. Quote, some pieces of music may be rather effective in cueing autobiographical memories, and that the recollections triggered by music are strongly and generally positively, effectively charged, unquote. Baumgartner, 1992. It was my intent to discover common musical features of hymns preferred by my choir in order to identify and program music that appeals to and serves the quality of their worship. Musical features considered were 1. Tonality, major or minor, 2. Meter, quadruple or triple, and 3. Ease of singing, vocal range, intervallic leaps, and length of the hymns. Choristers in the Laurel Presbyterian Church were asked their level of preference of 40 hymns used in their worship during the past year. A pen and paper Likert survey was conducted at the beginning of weekly choir rehearsals. The hymns used in my study were based on hymns sung often in worship services. A couple of the hymns shared hymn tunes but had different titles and texts. Thinking the differences in the text could be a factor in my chorister's preference for the hymns, I included a question in the participant questionnaire administered after the survey. The question asked participants about their level of preference for singing a familiar hymn tune with less familiar or alternate words. Of the 40 hymns used, only one was a hymn that had only been sung once by the choir, and it came from a Presbyterian hymnal supplement. The Likert survey listed 10 hymn titles per page and asked each chorister to evaluate their familiarity by levels 1 through 5, beginning with very unfamiliar, somewhat familiar, to very familiar. Each chorister was also asked to rate their level of preference by a similar rating scale, beginning with 1 for strongly dislike, neutral, to 5 for like very much. A small comment column was provided in each row where choristers were given verbal instructions to make any notes they wished about any of the hymns, but they did not have to justify their scoring. The paper surveys each had a participant number. A paper list of participant numbers with chorister names was kept by a designated chorister. This list was not to be shared with me until the final week of the survey. For each survey session, the choristers sang through 10 hymns. I stated the number, title, and hymn number, played an introduction on the piano, and they sang the first verse. Following each hymn singing, I gave the choristers a minute to fill in their responses. Then I announced the next number, title, and hymn number. No attempt was made to have the participants be silent between singing hymns, so some comments were made aloud. Enter midstream modification. I created an additional 5 hymns for the choir to evaluate on the last day, the day they were to complete the participant questionnaire. Hymn number 2, Love Divine, All Loves Excelling, and hymn number 3, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, were both more familiar versions of hymns they had previously surveyed with different words or hymn tunes. Additionally, I realized that the hymn Blessed Are They was the one hymn the choir had only ever sung once prior to the survey, and that they were going to survey it in the 4th survey session. I wanted to give them a second opportunity to sing and rate it. That is why it is included in this supplemental group of 5 hymns. Once the 40 plus 5 additional hymns had been surveyed, I administered a 2-page front and back pen and paper participant questionnaire. The questionnaire was administered post-survey as to not influence participant response. Questions included age, gender, church and music experience, musical preferences regarding hymn singing, compositional music features, and asked if corporate singing in church contributes to their feelings of spirituality. Because so much of the meager studies done regarding religious music involve queries of listeners, I thought I'd ask my choristers which they enjoy more, singing or listening. Probably a moot point for people who sing in choir. Data collection began October 4, 2023, occurred weekly, and ended November 1, 2023. Using an Excel workbook, the participant questionnaire data was placed in the first data sheet. Responses were totaled and averaged below each column. The 40 hymns survey were placed 10 hymns to a sheet. Participant numbers will still be found at the left, creating rows, while hymn numbers with familiarity and preference ratings were placed in the columns. This made it easier for me to compute sums, means, and modes. For my ease of identifying tonality quickly, I color-coded the title areas, this because of my chromesthesia. Any hymns scoring 4.5 and higher were highlighted in green. I then went through and highlighted the lowest scoring hymns in red. The 12 least preferred hymns were gathered with scores for familiarity, preference scores, and comments. And the same was done with the 12 most preferred hymns. Correlations were expected to exist between the chorister's self-reporting of experience and preferences found in the participant questionnaire and the chorister's hymn ratings. For the purpose of analysis, comments were included with ratings in the 5 most preferred and the 5 least preferred hymns. After examining the top and let's say bottom 12, I narrowed it down to 5 each. With these, I made a deep dive into the music to examine vocal ranges, intervallic leaps, and length of each hymn by verses and total measure sung. You will notice that in the least preferred hymns, most are familiar or known, averaged well by the choristers. Number 4 appears to be preferred less than it is familiar. As it turns out, the hymn tune is the same as the tune Faith of Our Fathers, which are the words my chorister report having learned the hymn to. So, of course, these alternate words and title create an incongruence, thus the lower preference rating. Here you can see the top 5 preferred hymns, but this time with some analysis of musical features. There is nothing remarkable about the tonality except that all are in major keys. It appears that quadruple meter is preferred, yet when looking at the whole of the survey, the meter is nearly evenly split between triple meter. The singing range of these preferred hymns is very comfortable, all being within an octave. Surprisingly, there are a few leaps of a sixth or octave in 3 of the 5 hymns. And the shorter hymns have it. Here's a look at a comparison of the length of hymns. The purpose of this study was twofold: to learn whether hymns preferred by my choristers are liked because they are familiar, and to identify and learn the extent to which common musical features of preferred hymns may exist. Based on the Hughes and Lois study, which demonstrated higher preference for hymns with minor tonalities or modes, I had expected to find similar results. If I had more closely inspected the 40 hymns I used for my study, I would have noted that only 1 hymn was in a minor mode. The reason for this could be that the Hughes and Lois study was conducted in the UK within the context of the Anglican Church. Daniel Jesse scrutinized the top sung religious songs in the United States. Of the most frequently sung hymns during the years 1988 to 2018, Jesse found, quote, "There are only 10 songs out of 133 songs that have minor keys." What I discovered about preference of meter was that the mean score for hymns in triple meter was nearly the same as those in quadruple meter. Truly about half of all the songs I surveyed were in one or the other. There were no hymns of irregular meter. Hughes and Lois suggest preference tends to favor hymns in triple meter. That was not the case for my little ensemble. Thus far, I have 2 null hypotheses for the musical features of tonality and meter. In my study, they appear to have little effect on the hymn preference. Of interest, and contrary to my hypothesis, is that the least preferred hymns do not include many intervallic leaps above the sixth. Perhaps my more educated than most singers are bored by the more conjunct melodies. Of the most preferred hymns, there are quite a few more intervallic leaps. Does this suggest that the larger intervals may convey more emotion to the choristers? Perhaps navigating the conjunct melodies is part of the pleasure of singing, and more difficult hymns are more interesting. Overall, within my ease of singing as a subset of musical features, it would appear vocal range, for this study anyway, is similar and within an octave for most all hymns considered. It appears no one in my choir wants to sing one hymn for very long. They prefer hymns with more intervallic leaps of a 6 or greater. The study did not focus on the quality of harmonies and most frequently utilized chord progressions. So a more accurate study might examine those musical features as they relate to preference. Beyond the musical features I sought to identify, it would appear my study might have been more robust had I focused on text, perceptions of text, and combinations or congruence of text in hymn tune melodies. When asked about what they pay more attention to while singing, only 1 reported attending to the text more than the music. When asked about singing alternate words to a hymn, only 1 expressed displeasure, and most reported to not care if the words were different. Yet, their preference rating for familiar hymn tunes to unfamiliar texts demonstrated a different story. Of the comments choristers gave with the hymns, most had to do with problems with the text or with feelings and remembrances of past experiences. Words and music interact with and, quote, become integrated in memory so that each component facilitates recognition of the other component. Stratton and Salanowski, 1994, and Crowder et al., 1986. Perhaps singing familiar hymns with different or unfamiliar texts causes some cognitive dissonance. This observation from Stratton et al. And Crowder et al. Might explain why my choristers' preference ratings were generally higher for hymns to which they had prior connection, or for those hymns sung in the way with the words as they first learned them.